What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Look, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tack Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Mumbai Gutapi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles in Fort Lauderdale.
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, Macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault. He was a retard. I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. If you're watching us on Iconic, Rockfin, or YouTube, or you're listening wherever podcasts are served, we certainly do appreciate your support. We can't do it without also the support of our sponsor. C60 Purple Power is a new sponsor to the show. We've had Ken Schwartz on. He's the founder and chief science officer. And what C60 Purple Power is, it's a naturally occurring molecule. C60 is a naturally occurring molecule. It's comprised of 60 carbon atoms. It was theorized in the 60s and 70s by Buckminster Fuller, but it was finally discovered in the late 80s. The scientist that discovered it won a Nobel Prize for it. It's the only molecule of a single element that forms a spherical cage. This unique structure makes it a free radical sponge with the ability to neutralize free radicals and reset itself again and again. It is the most powerful antioxidant known. It is several hundred times more powerful than conventional antioxidants. And not only can C60 help maximize the efficiency of the cells in producing energy, but it may also provide cellular protection against many toxic environmental factors. The product's made in the United States. It's 99.99% pure sublimated C60, never exposed to solvents. It's made with 100% certified organic oils. It's third-party tested. It's produced in FDA-compliant, GMP-certified facility. And it's also available for free shipping. So use the promo code MACRO. Check it out. I have been taking it now for a little over 6 weeks. I feel great. I've been giving it to my pets. They're showing massive improvements. I am a firm believer in this. I don't know how it all works. I just know that it works. So go to c60purplepower.com, use the promo code MACRO, and help support a local small business as well. So I'm excited for this one. I'm excited for all my episodes, but I'm especially excited for this one. Because when you look out into the landscape of the alternative media to see who's doing really great work, one of the first criteria that you need to find is, besides the obvious honesty and footnoting and deep research and all that, is, have they been banned? Have they been targeted by social media companies? Have they been deplatformed? Have they been the examples made to people talking about some very uncomfortable facts, things that take you off of the established narrative? And I would say that Ryan Cristian from the Last American Vagabond is, I don't know, maybe if there was a top 10 most wanted list, you're definitely on it, right?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely something that seems focused. For sure. One thing I've noticed more than anything, there's a lot of people out there that have been multi-platform censored long before me, but the way that it's been going lately, especially seeing some of these people that were multi-platformed, censored quietly later down the line, seemingly getting a channel back, or YouTube gave something, or allowing them to have an app somewhere where they didn't before. We kind of see that slow. For me, it's been really odd. I haven't gotten any engagement, no emails, no here's why we're doing this and here's what we're doing for the community. I've gone over a couple of them, like from Patreon, for instance, but it's usually from Twitter and YouTube side. It was just quiet deletion, no discussion, which really tells you something, which shows you that they can't argue, here's what he was doing wrong. Well, they try to, but they avoid the paper trail. And then Patreon, the sort of thing we're seeing with James Corbett and Whitney in the same way, where they're going, you're not citing, you're spreading debunked theories and misinformation. And it's just wild. But yeah, it's definitely something that seems focused. When you can see the multi-platform idea. And I also want to stay away from saying that that means that what we're doing is correct, because that's a dangerous association, but it definitely is a good marker to look at. Yeah. But when you see it across multiple platforms at one time, how do we not all see what that is? I mean, that's a collective effort across multiple corporations with different boards and different groups. That's a long time planned idea that executes. That's really obvious.
Yeah, and it's tempting to say that sort of treatment is limited to the Alex Joneses of the world, but it's not really. He just gets all the publicity for it. But
which is the point.
It's been happening to quite a few people. It's as they say, you take the most flack when you're right over the target, and to be right over the target these days doesn't mean to come out with some inflammatory statement. It doesn't mean to even expose something that is extremely well hidden. It can just be as simple as pointing out something that goes against the official narrative, even if at one point it was the official narrative, even if the same narrative storytellers like the Faucis and everything, you come out and write about, you say, about the mask situation. Don't need to wear the mask. They say that's medical disinformation. You go, well, how come Fauci's on camera saying it?
Right. Exactly.
The hypocrisy is staggering, I guess, is my point.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that's what's so incredible about it, is that we're citing information and giving people full disclosure. At least I am. And I think, a lot of people are, like yourself as well, are giving a lot of the source material, a lot of the information, and saying, okay, here's data. Right? Raw data. You can look at it, you can research it, you can come to your own conclusions. Okay, on top of that, here's what I thought about it. Right? How in the world can that possibly be misinformation? Sure, I can be wrong, but aren't we allowed to be wrong sometimes? You know what I mean? But by the way, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. I have a really anyone go out there, just look at my track record of things that I've said, and we're all dealing with it now. Even now, main sort of debunkers, like what's his name, Z-Dog or something on YouTube, that was just one of these guys hacking down Mikovits and these people and, laughing at him, making fun, and, with a lot of ad hominem attacks and whatnot. Now coming out a recent video kind of saying did we misunderstand the mask information? And it's really bad. And it's like this equivocation, sort of well, we did the right thing, but it's and okay, so what's the problem? Or the real point is, let's say they finally go, oh, we misunderstood it. Breaking news. Are they ever going to swing back around and be like, these people were saying this 8 months ago and looking at the data? No, of course they won't, right? And that really reveals the whole point there. It's only about acceptable information given by authority, regardless of whether it's true or not. And that's what you were kind of saying before. And to your point before that, I almost forgot this. And I think this is really interesting. People like you, people like me, in this sense, we're popular for being, what would you call being good people, for caring about things, for caring to for having the wherewithal to go maybe we should read this for ourselves. And that's your point. It's crazy. We shouldn't be popular for doing something everybody should be doing. It's just, it's crazy, but that shows you how rare it is today. And that's been socially engineered for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And you could have, it's funny that the information that you're talking about, you can say at one point during this agenda and it's fine, and you could say it at another point and it'll get you deplatformed, and then you say it again and it's fine again, because the story has changed. I keep using masks as the example, but it's you could pick others, but with the mask situation, it was preposterous early on. It was idiotic, and everyone said so, and Fauci said so, and and nobody wore them. Then there was there was a switch in the summer. It was as if things were sort of dying off a little bit and people were going back to normal. And I always felt like they needed a visual representation of this invisible virus. How do you show a virus? How do you keep people scared when there aren't Chinese, like the Chinese videos of people falling over and dropping dead, or,
which is a conspicuous difference.
For sure. Yeah. We never saw any of that. But when you don't see that, and luckily, thankfully, let's just say, we don't see bodies stacked up on the sidewalks like, the videos from, Poland in 1939. And, so we don't see all those things. We aren't seeing a virus because we can't see viruses. So they had to have this visual representation. Then it became the mask. Then you go in the grocery store in July, everyone's got the mask on. I know not where you live, but out in some of most of the other states.
Still actually here as well, to be honest. Okay. But it's I would argue less than other places, at least as I hear it.
Right. So then it became, once the mask mandate came in, then you couldn't speak out against the masks at all. Even though you could rightly pull up something from 6 weeks earlier and go, yeah, but what about this? This is the exact opposite of this is your guy, Fauci, not my guy, your guy, American government. And he's saying the exact opposite thing. How do you reconcile this? And their response is, you're spreading misinformation. You've got to go.
I was going to add that the biggest part there is the actual story is that he lied. I mean, that's actually their narrative. They actually claim, well, he was, lying to us. You can call it whatever you want, because they knew they had to have enough masks for the medical industry, so they didn't want us to come and grab them. So if you're willing to argue that, so he's willing to lie to you for what they think is best, what if he's lying now for what they think is best? It's just really, it doesn't make sense. And there's a lot of that inconsistency across this whole thing.
Yeah, and then you add to that a half century of intentionally dumbing down the population through fluoride and television and
our school system,
and you get it, among other things, vaccines and there's a variety of environmental factors and that contribute to this. And you get to a point now where, we kind of joke about the movie Idiocracy, but in some cases, parts of it are becoming documentary. It's so it's this perfect storm of dumbing down the population or getting them to a point where they're just so conditioned to trust everything that the media says, then coming out with a story that's constantly changing. During the year of 2020, the COVID story, if there's one thing you can say without doubt about it, is that it was constantly changing. There was never any sort of consistent message to it. The numbers always changed. The way it could transmit changed. The number of the whether you wear masks, then the number of masks, how you take the test, what you set. Every aspect of this had question marks around it, and yet the one thing you were not allowed to do was question it.
That's a really good way to put that. It's very hard to miss what you just said right there. And the points that stand out are, to your point, the obvious things that we should be able to question are things like, and this is one that is for such an odd, I just can't even wrap my mind around how people think this is somehow debunked or it's misinformation. The side of the box of masks that literally reads that this has no protection against COVID-19 or other viruses. It's literally what it says. And then somebody can post that in quotes with the picture of the box of masks on Facebook, nothing else. And it says misinformation. I've seen multiple examples of that. How can you possibly claim that just stating what it says is misinformation? Oh, because people might see that and misunderstand what it means. This is Orwellian stuff we're talking about here. And the point is, the box of masks, the company did that. This was like March, February. This was early in this whole thing. So you're telling me this company went out of their way to put a disclaimer? They know what these things can do. They're the ones that run the tests. They're telling you we're not going to be held accountable for whatever the government's claiming right now. That's how I see how that went down. Then you've got things like the Surgeon General. And the same thing about Fauci, where they didn't just say like Fauci said, it doesn't give you the protection that you think that it does. But he was lying to us, they say. But the Surgeon General came out and verbatim said, why are you guys buying these? They have no protection against that's not like, so were they both lying to us? Like, it's just the whole thing becomes an obvious level of dishonesty. And this is where I come into what I keep calling lying for your truth. You can even give it to these people and say, sure, let's say Fauci was doing that because he knew that the fake news out there was, he wanted to do it for what's best for us. Right. We still have to acknowledge that we're being lied to on a damn near daily basis. And I don't know why why that is acceptable. That's what really blows me away. And the other good example we can go to after the mask, because I have a lot of points on masks if you want to get into it, is the lockdown. The WHO versus the WHO came out and said lockdowns we shouldn't be doing, and we're still doing them. So it's like, what happened to the whole thing about not challenging guidelines? It's all over the place. But the mask point, I believe they're being used intentionally at some level because they lead to more illness. I know that's probably, I'm not afraid to say these things today. People can call me whatever they want. This is backed up by a lot of data that I've gone over. And I think I can't speak as a fact that I know that their intentions are this. I just don't see how they could possibly not know that these things are leading to infection when their own studies found they lead to more infection. Or, you know what I mean? All these different things we've gone over, that they're doing this for a very clear reason, and I find that hard to ignore.
It reminds me of who could have possibly known that they would fly planes into the World Trade Centers? And it's like, well, you mean besides the report that was on your desk that said they might fly planes into the World Trade Center? Besides that report, who could have possibly known? Or
their own study, doing it themselves and testing it,
Right. Who could have possibly known that these masks were going to cause oral damage? They were going to increase the rate of gingivitis in your mouth. They were going to you're going to be breathing in. Who could have possibly known? Oh, I don't know. Everybody that was criticizing it, all of the doctors that have come out and said, that whole camp. But one of the things that I noticed that is so, you mentioned Orwellian, and it is quite literally Orwell would weep if he heard the term social distancing. Right. That is straight out of 1984, is it not?
Yeah. It's like Patriot Act. It's like any of these things. It's counterintuitive. It is the opposite of what it is. Ron Paul always talks about this because it's, not only do they give it a name that suggests it's the opposite of what they're trying to accomplish. Like the Patriot Act's a good example, the War Powers Act. What they ultimately do is say, oh, okay, so you guys are unhappy. I got to close my Telegram. Apologize about that. They say, okay, so you guys are unhappy with whatever this problem is, whatever, having too much power to just wage war without influence from the government. Okay, so we're going to make a law to stop that. And then you actually look at the law and you go, oh, wait a minute. It turns out what they're really doing is just legalizing what we didn't like before. Problem solved. And that's all of that Patriot Act. It's all of these things. Now, yes, there are levels of it where you get people you could argue may have an honest intention, trying to use it the way that they were sold. But at the end of the day, we're looking back years and years and years, we see where it actually ends up. The Patriot Act's the best example. It was aimed at us. It always was, and at least patriotic thing I could think about. So to your point, it's the exact same thing.
Yeah, and speaking of Patriot Act and the event that came out of this, and we've already mentioned 9/11. We talk. I've talked to Whitney about this. I know you obviously have done great her whole series on Last American Vagabond about this, about Dark Winter, about Tara O'Toole, and Thomas Inglesby being involved early on in 2001. Then we see a resurgence of these people through Event 201 in the end of 2019. It seems like their playbook is relatively limited, and the players that they have on their bench there's just a couple of them, and they keep bringing them back in. So what if the Dark Winter simulation that went live doesn't give you chills? I would imagine seeing a repeat performance from these two people coming back for Event 201, which is the Dark Winter 2 Electric Boogaloo of our generation.
Right. What do we add on the incessant repetition by every damn politician we can see? It's going to be a dark winter. It's like they really think we're children. Like, the point is that in polite society, the elitist circles, it's not okay. It's not acceptable to point out and be like, uh-oh, that aligns with this thing over here that we keep seeing. But there's no way that they would repeatedly cite the thing that they want to do. That's conspiracy theory, right? They're not allowed to make those obvious connections because that's dangerous. That's the problem. These people have been trained. They're socially engineered. They know what they're not supposed to talk about. But when we see Biden and everybody everywhere saying Build Back Better or Dark Winter, it's like, come on, guys, just rub your brain cells together. There's something going on there, and the Dark Winter thing is a very obvious example. And by the way, as you know, Whitney Webb has done amazing work on a lot of other ones. Crimson Contagion, we've gone over, and the problem is is that they tend to have the same people, the same organizations, the same driven agenda. And every time they do a simulation, it ends up coming to pass. I mean, the same thing we were joking about with the airplanes. This is exactly the same point. They were actually simulating planes flying into the buildings, and then later said, we never thought about that. It's like they were literally simulating it. So Event 201, or Corbett has a great actually video on a side note about 9/11 sort of, but really showing you the breadth of how many times that's happened, where they game it and then it happens. Event 201, if you really want to have your socks blown off, for those that haven't seen it, just sit down and literally watch the whole thing. It'll blow you away. It is as if it's 1984 to what we're doing. They wrote it out, and that's literally what's happening, down to the coronavirus, down to the terms they used. I mean, remember, they actually used a term for SARS-CoV-2 when it first came out that was the term they used in the 201 exercise. That was the first term they used before they gave it SARS-CoV-2. It's just going, like, how much do we really need to see? I genuinely believe there was a level of this between these people, the Inglesby and the Tara O'Toole, and I'm trying to think of a lot of the other people that are involved. They go back to the anthrax and the whole thing, but they have parts throughout this whole process. And the biggest part to remember is that they were as James Corbett's talked about, as we've talked about, 9/11, in my opinion, was stage one of what this is. This was the beginning stage of the surveillance state. And once we see the technocratic evolution, the ability to use the nanotechnology the way that they said they would 20 years ago, that's what we're seeing now. This is stage two. And it is the same thing with the same people, the same objective. The scariest part is to think about the bio aspect of that. Because now today a lot of people are beginning to flirt with the idea of, the terrain theory and these new ideas about how this may have been manipulated, but it's really difficult. That's why people are really unhappy that I am not like, it's this or it's that. I'm in the middle right now. I'm totally torn, because how can you look back at the things like, the anthrax and these things where I believe it's very clear that our government was obviously toying and playing with these substances and putting them out, these viruses, and manipulating them and hurting people with them. So how does that make sense today with that narrative? But there's a lot going on. I think what we need to recognize is our government is lying to us in just the flagrant fashion possible.
Yeah, I think that if they ever told the truth, it would be by accident. They wouldn't know what to do with themselves about it. It's when you see, that's one thing that we've gotten good at in the alternative media. I would say a lot of people in the alternative media, or just human beings in general, pattern recognition, recognizing things that you see over and over again and going, it might not be, as they say, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, but so it might not be exactly the same thing. Although with Tara O'Toole and Thomas Inglesby, it's literally the same people. I was expecting Judith Miller to get coronavirus back in March, to be honest with you. That may happen at some point. I don't know. But you see the overlap. It's this blending of science, the military, and the media. So I have been calling the media co-conspirators in this whole plan. I know that you have no love for the alternative media. What do you mean? Would this have happened in March of 2020 without the support of the mainstream media?
Yeah, just to clarify, you said alt, and I have no love for the mainstream media, is what you were saying there, and I definitely agree with that. But if this wouldn't have happened, if the mainstream media had played their master role in all this, I mean, I literally don't think it would be possible to achieve something like this without the mainstream media influencing people's opinions, controlling the narrative as much as they can. And even so, I think I would possibly make the argument that even the majority may still recognize what this is, maybe a small, 53%, something like that. But that's my hopeful, wishful thinking. But yeah, without that, man, I truly do not think it would be possible, because where would all these, as Corbett calls them, the normies out there, where would they, how would they even know what's going on, right? They wouldn't know. They would be looking out their window and going, everything seems fine, which probably is, right? And that's
Bill Hicks. The Bill Hicks. I look out my window, nothing but crickets,
right?
And as an example of that, I think when we saw the mask situation ramp back up, that was pure media driven. I mean, it had to be 100% pure media driven, because if it had been an actual fear for somebody's safety, they would have gone to the mask situation right off the bat. And since it sort of faded away, then it came back. It seemed like it was fully media fueled. So we know that they sit around in these council CFR meetings and Atlantic Council meetings and Bilderberg, and they plot these things out. we see Event 201 happening 6 months before the launch of this situation, March of 2020. How far back do you think they had this thing planned?
Excuse me. Well, I think that speaks to the larger thing about, if we believe that 9/11, for instance, and others, by the way, were, preludes to what is happening today, then you could argue it's been planned for a really long time. I mean, pointing to the Converging Technologies document that I talk about from, I believe, 2002. Yeah, 2002, where they're saying, look, we're going to openly, by the way, right? They're discussing converging these technologies, which is your biological body with the technology. And they're discussing altering our technology within the next altering our evolution within the next 20 years, right? So it's hard not to see that leading to exactly what we're doing now, with nanotechnology being all the rage and everything they're doing medically and otherwise, right? It's like, that's their future. That's the technocratic point. But it's hard to, I don't know how they could have possibly had this like whole thing now planned 20 years ago, because unless they knew, it's certainly possible, but I would argue it's developed over time. And again, it's hard. We should get away from seeing it as, one monolithic force that's ultimately controlling everything. It's a very multifaceted, ultimate, powerful agenda, but there are people, I would argue, a unelected power structure of condensed power that arguably is leading the charge. I think that's very easy to see, but I think it evolves over time, step by step. We begin to see what we need. And obviously, we do play a factor. You know what I mean? Like, our pushback does to some degree guide how they maneuver around us, So I think it just adapts, But at the end of the day, what they wanted was a system, this, what we calling this biosecurity, the panopticon that they've built, right? For those who don't know the term, it's, the centralized view of a kind of a circle prison where you never really know. You just assume they're always watching you because they're center, right? So they're historically speaking, prisoners in these prisons, they act better because they think, well, I'm being watched. It's always right in the center, So that's the idea. They're building this, or as Corbett called it, the digital gulag, right? Yeah. Which is what it is. We don't see it, but they are building these bars around us right now.
I feel like we are maybe not our audiences, but as a society, we're out there with the bricks helping them, we're unloading, we're saying, here, build the walls taller over here for our own safety. I mean, yes. I like to remind people that walls work both ways. They begged for that on the border and said, well, we'll keep all the Mexicans out that are trying to get in here. It's like, yeah, well, you realize that when it goes down, you'll be keeping us in as well. So,
which we're seeing with COVID right now. Like, that's obviously becoming a thing where you can't even go anywhere unless you have your pass, unless you can get your test and your quarantine. It's the same thing.
Let's talk about that then. Let's talk about this march forward in lockstep, to use a term that's been unfortunately used quite a bit, towards this vaccine passport. This is just an absence of any sort of logic. And from my standpoint, I can't understand the justification for something with a 99.97% survival rate, a median death age of 80. This does not sound, this is not something to be alarmed about. I feel for anybody that died from this, but I am, from a statistical analysis standpoint, it's an insignificant number of deaths, especially when you factor in what the CDC said about 6% actually dying with it and 94% having 2.6 comorbidity conditions. So it can't actually, it's obviously not about real health. It's about control. It's always been about control. Where did we see this vaccine passport roll out? I think we're seeing the first test run in Israel. I get visions of China's social credit system plugging into this. Where are we headed?
I mean, so people know it's already happening. The Excelsior Pass is already in New York operating, right? These things are already happening. The airlines are already using these. So there's some that are already rolling out pilot programs. So even in the United States, it's currently underway. This is what I think is so crazy is I keep talking about this and people will say that's fake news. Like, as of like a few days ago on Twitter. And I'm just going like, it's literally happening in Israel. You know what I mean? Like, how do you argue any other? But this has always been the plan, right? This is one part of this kind of like the biosecurity, technocratic kind of control matrix that they're building, right? Where you can't operate your life. And by the way, exactly what people like us were saying months and months and months ago, societal economic exclusion. This is how it's going to work. It's very clear. They've been talking about this. Now it's here. And now it's the people that said that's never going to happen are saying, now it's for our safety. It's like that the logical way it goes. But this is already happening, and it's going to be the way this goes. Like, this is what's crazy, to your point, that we're talking about something that, and the statistics you used, that's including the point you made about people, the over 80, the nursing homes. You X that off, and you take off the potential. I say potential because I don't know where the number is. The absolutely there false positives, but to what degree is questionable. Even 30% on CDC's website, as well as the combination of flu and pneumonia numbers in that, which they also state. I mean, just that added to what we're talking about, it seems like, how it has to be less than the flu. Because right there, it's equivalent to the flu if you X off the older people in that regard, which should be happening, especially seeing as how it's been driven and forced into these nursing homes. I think it was something like over 70%, at least. I don't want to misquote the first number. Between 50 and 70% of our deaths in this country were in nursing homes, which is unbelievable. And then I think the vast majority of them were over 80. I don't understand how that can be something we talk about. But anyway, back to the point. Yeah. We're talking about the numbers and using this to justify a passport for people that obviously their immune system is working better than the vaccine itself. Or the fact that we're talking about children getting this thing right now. Our mainstream media is right now arguing that to focus on the children because there will be the key to ending this pandemic. The CDC still states they have a 0% chance. Of course, it's statistically like 0.0003 or something like that, but that's statistically zero. So we're talking about people that don't need it, that aren't in risk, aren't even spreading it because asymptomatic seems to be near non-existent according to the British Medical Journal, right? So, it's, this is the kind of things. How are we called conspiracy theorists for talking about stuff like this?
I don't know. I can't figure it out.
Crazy.
The conspiracy theorists are the people that are watching mainstream news or thinking that they need to wear double masks and a face shield because they're gonna get a virus and go home and drop dead from it. Even though that's not happening. That's it. It is. I've gotten to the point where I feel like a lot of the people out there they see themselves, in their real lives, they have no power, but they see themselves as becoming part of the solution by telling you to wear a mask or telling you to get a vaccine. It gives them a purpose. It makes them feel like they're helping. Now, of course, they haven't dug into the details of this because 15 minutes of looking at any sort of research or listening to one of your shows, and you'd be like, well, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. But don't let the facts get in the way of me patting myself on the back for being such a good citizen. And it's like their fear is looked at as a virtue, and your lack of fear is seen as a threat to their
fear.
Their fear, right? And if I'm not fearful, then what am I going to be? Who am I going to be anymore? And so it's when they rolled out the lockdowns in the UK, and you probably know this, but they didn't have the Minister of Health or any of those people come out and make the announcement. They had a psychologist come out and make the announcement because they knew that it was a psychological component to get people, to believe in this fear. This to me, and I want to get your take on this. This has got to be the largest psychological operation in our history.
It's funny you say that. I just talked about this again. The Stanford doctor just made that exact argument that this is the most catastrophic experiment we've ever done. But I had the primary example given by Patreon to censor me was when I was quoting the World Economic Forum stating, quote, "This is the biggest psychological experiment we've ever done in our species," or some species may have been the wrong word, paraphrasing, but that was a direct quote from the World Economic Forum. And the title just simply said, in quotes, that exact thing, and then something else. And I talked about all of it, and they censored me saying I was spreading misinformation. The other source was the WHO, point fact. But so they censored me for that. And it's like this, I'm quoting the very group that's integral to what you're talking about. It's so funny. But now the point was now that a Stanford doctor said the same thing. This whole thing, it literally is a psychological experiment. And if they can admit that, so can we, right? We are testing how we respond to such, and we have to go back to the historical examples of this kind of testing, whether it's in prisons or even like the idea of masking or prisons in the same way or internment camps. But these things have been used. And so there's obvious background to how this affects and you can look it up and realize that it has an effect of acquiescence, of what's the right word I'm looking for? And that's the wrong one. But, it shuts you down. It makes you more willing to just kind of go, okay. And the same thing with the whole idea of a parasite stress theory. You add the whole idea that they know that pandemics add the same thing. It begins to look like they're piecing together things and psychological tools that create a compliant populace. I mean, it's what it looks like very clearly to me.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go out, walk around, you see so many people that have fallen for this, and psychological operations come in all shapes and sizes. But like you mentioned, the mask component of this, I've heard people that talked about growing up in SRA families, satanic ritual abuse families that had gone through trauma-based mind control really young, and and some of them had said that when they were little kids, they were forced to wear masks. So that to me made me think that this is not some haphazard. Obviously, we've got a medical component to it, and it's a virus that you're a respiratory type thing, so they can justify the mask. I mean, they can, in some sort of weird logical way, they can sort of justify that mask. But when I heard that there was a component of this that was used to torture kids early on, and then you start to dig into they've done this to prisoners as well. This is more than just a random psychological operation. This is one that's very targeted, and I get the feeling with all these things. I get the feeling that the Tavistock Institute has played a role in this. That they've got their fingerprints on. They know what when you do this, then X happens, or when you say this, then the people move one way. It seems like we are being herded like cattle, and we're being given about the same amount of respect as you would give to cattle. And unfortunately, I'm sadly coming to the conclusion that for a lot of people, we might somehow deserve it, because we just tend to just check out and take no responsibility for our own actions. It's frustrating to me that people can't see this for what it is. I feel like is it only going to come like from the television? Are people only going to do what their televisions tell them to do? Because we've passed the point of logic. Logic doesn't exist. I mean, logic is not even a factor in this. We've had multiply changing directives from the powers that be. The powers that be have been busted flaunting their own rules, getting caught without masks, getting caught in restaurants, going on vacations, all these things. Are they trying to break our brains with this intentional contradictions?
Yeah, I've argued a similar thing. The inconsistencies of the whole story, the whole time, it creates a level of, think about like fake news early on, like fake news versus the real news, same idea, where you're like, I don't know where to look. So it's apathy. It's engineered apathy to get you to just go, well, I'm going to trust authority because I don't know what else to do, and that's what they do for people. They drive you to that. And that's intentional for sure. But there's a level of psychology to these things for sure. I mean, you could look at slaves in the past who had to wear the same kind of muzzle over their nose and their mouth. And you could argue that's just a coincidence or it just relates in a different way. But there is a psychological aspect of this, no matter what anybody says. There's been studies done on it. And it's amazing that we trust the science, but we don't like the science that says we don't like to look at. There's clear examples of this. Or you can talk about contact tracing in the same way, right? If you look at the bracelets and the things they're applying or using, every single one of these technologies had previously been used for prison populations, for tracing and tracking like terrorist people or cattle. Cattle exactly was the biggest example. Putting it on their anklets or whatever and tracking cattle, and it's the same. So it's only applied in mindless populations they want to control, or as they see it, right? And so interestingly, now it's applied to us, but it's for your safety, though. All of this has an effect, and it is absolutely driving people in a more compliant state. But I will argue that a lot of people, and this again, it could just be my wishful thinking, but I see this in the engagement on the comment sections in different videos, and you begin to see this weird difference where you go out on the street and you feel like you're surrounded by people that are buying it all, right? But then you go on these comment sections or these videos and you see just nothing but nobody buying it. Where are all the people that are supposed to be fighting for their side, right? So that does not prove. But I believe that a lot of these people out there that we see wearing their mask and walking along are because they just don't know what to do. They have a job that they have to do it for. They want to go shopping and they don't want to get yelled at by Karens over here or get, arrested by the police officer violently like we just saw in Texas, So I get it. But I recommend we're careful to assume that everybody is just completely lost. But, like I said the other day, even if that's the case, What are we gonna give up, Charlie? Obviously not.
Right.
We're gonna keep trying. So let's pretend like it's going our way.
Yeah. The thing about the mask that's fascinating to me is when you wear a mask, for their reasons, it's supposed to block this virus from going into you. But what it also does is it blocks your voice from coming out, and in more ways than one, in a physical sense and also in a psychological. I mean, it silences, it removes the lower part of your mouth. And if we did, we have COVID here, we have censorship here, and if we imagine them as being two circles, then the Venn diagram right in the middle lines up with COVID censorship. And that is we've been experiencing censorship for the last decade or so, and these organized attacks led by the Poynter Institute and ADL and German Marshall Fund and Atlantic Council, all these groups. They just don't want you talking about certain things. But nowhere where have we seen the mask component used as a form of silencing your voice. And I wonder, it seems to me like by wearing the mask, you are participating in the most devious form of censorship, the self-censorship, the impossible to quantify what that does to a person who wears a mask out in public, especially when they know it's bullshit and they wear it anyway. Ooh, what does that do to somebody?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because that means, subconsciously, even maybe on the surface, that you're sort of selling out, you're kind of just giving in because you don't want to, but to your other point though, it's really interesting to think about, because that absolutely has an effect. I mean, teachers will tell you that. How in the world am I supposed to teach this class when I can barely hear the people talking in the background? It's like that. I've heard that 100 times. So you're right. I mean, they must, whether they consciously realize it or not, they must stop talking while it's on, at least reduce them, because people can't hear me, right? And they don't want to touch it because then, half the time nobody even cares, even though that literally means you should throw it away and get a new one based on what doctors tell us, but who cares about the facts, right? But that's interesting. I really think you're right. You're right on with that. And that plays a huge factor there. But since we're on mask still, I want to make a couple points on this that I think are really relevant to people to know. First of all, on that other point, I think it's interesting. You touched on something very relevant right there. And you're right, except they're also wrong in other parts of the mainstream media, where you'll hear them scream that it's about this. I saw a video, I think it was from the World Economic Forum, but some other main entity like that, arguing that here's why the mask works. It helps filter out this and the virus, and it shows the video. But that's the literal diametric opposite of what the CDC and everybody else is arguing. It protects your grandma, right? It's not about protecting you. It's about protecting some of the virus from coming out and lessens the spread. But they'll go back and forth based on what they're trying to argue. None of those things are true. The data is very clear on that. We're talking 0.1 to 0.3 microns for the virus. Even within a droplet, that is something that is arguably dead in that sense if it's in a droplet. But the argument is they can fit through without that. But here's an interesting point, is that multiple studies, I was going to name it there and I can't remember the actual name. Multiple studies have come out and stated this. I just read a new one that this is the one I was mentioning about the M-Dog or Z-Dog or whatever that guy's name is. This is the one he was talking about, is they're showing, and they've shown this before COVID started, wearing the mask in fact creates the aerosolized particulates, because you're pushing out liquid, especially at the foggy, when it's cold outside, and it's becoming aerosolized. So yet again, and I can't even remember how many times I've said this, their action directly led to more spread, to more virus, if that's what you believe this is happening. I mean, I just find it to be incredible, and then of course we add on the idea of the bacterial pneumonia, another thing you mentioned, the periodontal disease and all the different things. Right. So that's what I truly believe there's a level of this that is choosing to use things that at least give the illusion that there is continual spread of some kind of a virus. Because remember, bacterial pneumonia is contagious, has the exact same symptoms as COVID-19 or whatever they tell us that is. Yeah. And that is 100% something you can cause by wearing a mask, especially when it's wet outside.
Well, I wonder about this when we get into the talk about, and you could see this coming a mile away, the new strains of the virus, right? And
I'm glad you bring that up.
Before they even mentioned that, I said, I don't know where I said it. I think I've said it a couple times, that my guess would be, and I'm not Nostradamus, I feel like I have an understanding of how these maniacs work, that the symptoms, the side effects of the experimental vaccines were going to be hijacked and used as symptoms of the new strain, so that so it blurred the line between what are we seeing with all these people with Bell's palsy or all these people with what, you go, no, that's the new strain doing that. You're like, because it can never be the vaccine, right? According to them, you can never actually blame the vaccine for it. So all of the side effects of an experimental vaccine, maybe not all of them, but some of them have been hijacked and used to indicate that you might have this new strain. And I can see this just playing out forever and ever and ever. Is there an end in sight to the number of new strains? Is it going to be like Ethereum crypto where it's like they build on top of this one platform a million other platforms that spring off of it?
That seems to be the plan, right? I mean, and this is not even really hidden. It's a really surface level idea. I'm interviewing Rosemary Frey later today. That's who I'm interviewing later today. And she just wrote an article about this and literally talking about how they have stated, and this is in the US, in the UK, and I think 2 other countries, that they will now be using the whole plug and play platform that they openly talk about on the mRNA discussion, right? That's their new plug and play Freudian slip, vaccine making, platform,
right?
That they're ultimately going to be making new vaccines on the new variants without any future safety tests. So they're saying, well,
go wrong.
Right. Well, the argument is, because we have the new variant and because we have the platform set up, we can just plug in the new variant and pump. There comes a new vaccine. It's like, and by the way, recognized for everyone that remember, this is how the first one went. China sent the genetic material on January 11th. January 13th, Moderna was already pumping out vaccines and testing them. That's because they already had the platform ready and they pumped in the genetic material. No one isolated this in this regard. There's no proof. And that's very obvious. Even the Chinese CDC admits now that we didn't isolate the virus, but they're still pretending like that's conspiracy theory, right? But so the point is, yes, the variants will continue to pop up because they say they do, and they'll continue to spread or they'll continue to be fear-mongered about. But there's 2 things to mention there. One is that a lot of really well-respected, highly educated doctors and scientists are speaking up, and I've seen multiple saying the variant thing is being intentionally misrepresented. Every single virus we know of has variants on a near constant basis. That little things are changing, and if you pick out these one small changes and you make a big deal about it, that is fear mongering because most of them are not actually dangerous. And so now we're seeing this continually pumped up. New variant found, and that's why we're locking down just in case. Right? So we're willing to use the catastrophic lockdown just in case. I mean, it's crazy. But more than that, we're talking about. I was going to say one more thing, and I lost my train of thought there. Go ahead, Charlie.
Well, let's jump internationally then, because in Australia, we saw them shutting down, or in New Zealand, we saw them shutting down the entire country for one case.
Exactly.
One case. So that can't, even the most brain dead, mainstream media addicted zombie has got to understand that there is a problem with that. This is not Ebola. This is not the Black Plague. I don't know why they feel, first of all, I think that it's important for people to just take a step back and go, think about how your government views you. They hate your guts. They steal from you constantly. They lie to you constantly. Why do you think they would all of a sudden give a shit about your safety so much that they want to get you vaccinated? If they've been lying to you and stealing from you and constantly changing the rules on you and giving their friends benefits that they don't give to you and locking up Black people at a disproportionate rate and doing all these horrible things, and quite rightly, us remembering what they've done in the Tuskegee experiments, what they've done with the Guatemala syphilis experiment, and all these things where they have intentionally infected their own people. What, now all of a sudden they care about us? This is a bit preposterous, right?
Yeah. This is where it comes down to the real discussion of common senses. It's like, or the point I make where the U.S. government's admitted to 239 times testing on unwitting individuals, both, abroad and at home. If we can't realize that they're the same grouping, the same entities that are involved now, or how are we going to pretend like they care about human life when they're continually exacerbating the world's worst humanitarian crisis in Yemen for geostrategic control? Clearly these people don't care about human life. They care about using your emotional attachment to human life to manipulate you out there. That's what it's really about, and this is what's so frustrating is going into like the eugenics aspect of this that seems very, very on the surface. Yeah. This is what seems so despicable about it, is they're using the argument about how we need to care about those people, in my opinion, to experiment on them first. Talk about despicable, right? England is a good example. 60% of the deaths in England, they tell us, from COVID-19 are disabled. How does that even make sense? Especially that we see England giving do not resuscitate orders to people with learning disabilities during COVID-19. Anybody want to explain that one to me? I mean, it's crazy. And the biggest one was that, maybe not the biggest, but another good example was the one that Reimer Fulmick, I always mispronounce his name, the lawyer, he pointed this out in a German nursing home. And I covered this on my show. There was a whistleblower who filmed this as a nurse. They forcefully vaccinated, I think it was something like 31 patients with dementia, all of them with dementia. 8 of them later died. Why was it only the ones with dementia? I mean, you explain that to me, right? I mean, there's a weird effort happening here. Of course, that was censored and called fake news, despite it being a verified whistleblower, of course, because we protect whistleblowers in this country.
Right. Yeah. It's theater of the absurd. And for us, rightly and logically and calmly, sometimes pointing this out, we are branded as being conspiracy theorists. It's frustrating to me. I feel like we're past the point of theorizing about this. This is conspiracy analysis. We take a look at what's actually happening. I mean, we could look, you and I'm sure we could geek out all night long on Antarctica and what's going on there and speculate and fill our heads with all kinds of things, which would be fun. But we don't even need to do that with a lot of the topics that we're dealing with on a daily basis. You mentioned, you just mentioned Syria or Yemen and what's going on there. I mean, if I post something on Facebook about what's happening in Yemen, it will get fact checked. And I will be told that I am putting out disinformation, when in actuality I'm putting out, fact-based information. It's treated that like I don't know, like I'm some sort of I don't know, domestic terrorist. Mm-hmm. I've noticed lately this push, and I think it sort of it's the next step in this. We've talked about the COVID lies, we've talked about censorship lies, and then the third component of this is this transition into the catch-all phrase of being a domestic terrorist. And that, I fear, is a direction that we're going. When you don't believe the COVID lies, you have a problem with the censorship, you are then labeled as somebody that is a troublemaker, and you are given this designation. Should we be fearing this new term and how it's going to be used moving forward?
Absolutely. I mean, again, this ties back to very clearly, in this case, the connection to what happened post 9/11, right? I mean, this is coming full circle. And what they're ultimately doing here is taking something that's seemingly disconnected from COVID-19, right? Even though it's not, when you really dig in and find how they're already drawing lines over to people they're claiming are going to use bio attacks on us, and somehow connecting them with the MAGA group, which makes literally no sense. But there's a weird tangential connection here that they're making, and it's seemingly with nothing to back it up. So there's an effort being made there, but what they're going to do is make this out to be domestic terrorism, right? If it ultimately eventually come back to basically just, well, if you're willing to challenge the government, you're a domestic terrorist, which is obviously something most of them, well, that seems to make sense. But then it's going to swing around to something like COVID-19. Well, we're challenging the government right here, right? How dare we put people at risk? And this is why it's becoming a war. Biden just said we're on a war footing, just like Trump did, because they're so different, guys, right? We're on a war footing for COVID-19. And so the point is, again, just like actually, as Whitney pointed out, your body is now the battlefield. That's how this is going. This is the new evolution of all of this. So it's eventually going to swing around. And I've been saying this for a while. I feel strongly this will eventually come to connect in some weird way, where we're going to see the domestic terrorism thing come to a peak, which it already kind of did once, but it's going to be used in a way to argue that outside forces are manipulating within, right? And then it's going to come back to maybe something like the vaccine, where Iran, and they already made this argument, they're saying Russia is trying to undermine Pfizer's vaccine. You saw that one? Yeah. So now it becomes same old tired use. Now we're Russian disinformation, just like before. And now it becomes we're domestic terrorists, or at very least insurrectionists, because we're on the digital level, revolting against the government. You can see where this goes, basically, and that's not hard to recognize how that's been trying to be built for a really long time post 9/11. Anybody as a dissident is of danger.
Yeah, it made me think when the Patriot Act sort of described, redefined the battlefield, and with, I haven't heard Whitney talk about our body being the battlefield, but what a great analogy, because when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And when the United States is everything is a war, so we have to be on a war footing. We have to attack the virus. We have to, declare a state of emergency. We have to do all these things. This is war terminology, but I shouldn't be too surprised because then again, we just look back to what other invisible enemy we spent trillions of dollars chasing around the globe, which is terrorism.
Or all of them
around every corner. They're going to get you, just like this virus.
Look at every single one of these past wars, right? They're all aimed at something that can literally never be ended. Like you can say, sure, we'll go after terrorism forever, but just somebody could wake up tomorrow and decide to be a terrorist, right? The idea is it's meant to never end. It's nebulous idea that they can always create themselves and justify. And same analogy applies to COVID-19, right? It's the biosecurity state, the same narrative, right? It's just a nebulous, endless thing, and it applies in the same way, And we're trying to think of the other examples. We had the war on terror. We have the war on poverty, the war on hunger, whatever. Except war on drugs is the biggest one. And it's like, and even the best example there is the war on drugs, because what do we know? That they, in fact, tripled the problem. What a great job, guys. Well, let's keep giving them money to keep making it bigger.
Yeah.
It seems to be the case.
Yeah. It was George Carlin. What was in, he's talking about bombing people back to the Stone Age. And what was in those bombs that they dropped on Nagasaki? Fertilizer? Because everybody from there turned out, they're exceeding us. And so we've turned into this nation of warmongers, addicted to their television set, that can't have an original critical thought, and we're so...
The one's lost anyway, I would argue.
The one's lost, yeah. And I'm talking about those people. They're being conditioned for a life on the digital plantation. And unfortunately, they are walking in to the paddock, not to be confused with our shooter in Las Vegas, the paddock, encloses the sheep. What a choice of names for that guy. But we're corralling ourselves into this this new digital prison that has I have great fear about this, in part not just because of the obvious plan, but really maybe more so because of the obvious ignorance of a vast majority of the population, that even when presented with information, just have an inability for it to get through to their heads. And it's frustrating to me. You guys have been doing really great work with your series. I mean, you've had Whitney Webb, you have Derek Bros. What is going on over there with The Last American Vagabond and the multiple series that you've put out over the last year?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more coming as well. But I would argue your point first that that's a choice more than anything. I would argue they're all capable. I think it's a choice. I think they're choosing to say, well, I'm not supposed to look at that. So it's about getting past that. The willful ignorance, right? The choice to be a part of whatever they think they're a part of. Like, that's what we're trying to beat, in my opinion. But these series, if you will, there's a few of them, but more so it's become after them lately, just, them writing about stuff that's, I wouldn't argue they're all under necessarily like one of their series, but one of the good ones is like the Dark Winter series and the things that Whitney done in the past. But there's a lot of great work that's coming your way in the very near future, right? Derek and Whitney and Robert Inlakesh as well are all writing about things right now, trying to get information and to bring this stuff to the forefront. And by the way, I always note for everyone out there that Derek's also writing for Conscious Resistance, which is his own thing, and Whitney's also writing for Unlimited Hangout, which is her own thing, and which I'm happy to support. Right? I mean, that's the point, right? Grow and get this stuff out there. But the series will continue. And what I actually would love to do is get somebody get like a compilation of even more than just Derek and Whitney, and do something like, have a group kind of, I mean, this actually, funny enough, thinking about this is something that Whitney had brought up a long time ago, is building some sort of like a hub for people like ourselves to multi-support and, everyone just come on and post. I mean, it kind of sounds like things that we already have, but it's interesting to see something built by people that all are fighting the same kind of thing that we're fighting against right now. But the long story short, yes, there's a lot more coming your way, including my show that comes out almost every day covering whatever I think is important,
Yeah, your show is great. I love your approach to it. It's measured and rational and calm and all those
sometimes
things, but packed with information. And I feel like I feel like when I get done watching your every time I've watched your show, I'm nodding along. I'm going, yeah. Why can't everybody see this? Why can't why can't everybody understand this? But because you're not overly technical. You keep it at a level where people can digest this. You
intentionally so. That's that. I mean, I really pride myself on having this be, at least as best as I can, a kind of a bridge between the people that are just now, for the first time in their whole lives, going like, okay, there's something wrong here, right? The media something's wrong. Let me do my own research, and hopefully they stumble across this, and it's not like, here's the funny part is, you and I both know, we were talking about satanic ritual abuse. Like, there's a lot of really, really ridiculously gross and dark things out there that are very real, that, I mean, I've covered, for those that care to look, I've covered the pedophilia and positions of power scenario, which long before Pizzagate, is a real thing here. The point is, though, that that's too much for some people, at least in the beginning, So you got to let them guide them into the beginning stages of this stuff. And then hopefully I can be the funnel to lead them to people that will take them to that next level and understand the deeper things. But I really pride myself on that. I'm trying to make it something that is easy for people to step into and give them the tools to branch out from there and not just get, I use QAnon as an analogy is, people right in 2016 forward, people were waking up like crazy. I think that's why they did what they did with Russiagate and QAnon, but people were waking up and they're going, this is great. There's all this stuff. And they step one step, hit a landmine, they're QAnon, right? They're one step and they're right stuck into something new, and that's what happens. But that's why we need to give them the tools to be able to see it, to recognize, okay, this is a landmine. I got to be careful about where I step and be, that's the idea, and at least I try to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I tried to give the Q people at least a little bit of a pass, in the sense that I know that they woke up to this nonsense, that, they were groggy. They didn't know what was they were immediately funneled into the Republican Party, which I don't love. They were told to sit there and trust the plan and do nothing, which they did. And then when it all imploded, they went, what happened? Where are the arrests and everything? And it's like, oh, guys, you've been had, like, don't feel bad about it. It happens to the rest of us, but now you're awake, and hopefully you're pissed off. And now you have to realize that when you are walking through this field of information, you have to look down. You have to make sure that you're not stepping on these proverbial landmines, because they're set by professional liars that are very good at what they do. They're good at creating narratives. They're good at creating dead ends and cul-de-sacs that you go down, and you wind up, spending hours looking at something that isn't real. I try to give them a little bit of a break. I know we've all thought something and then only to find out that it wasn't really the case. But where do things go from now? How do you see, just, we'll wrap up with this. Where do you see the tail end of this year? Where does this even go? I mean, do we somehow break free from this? Do they overplay their hand? Are they so arrogant that they trip over themselves and the whole thing becomes exposed? Or are we just, is that just wishful thinking on our end?
No, not at all. I mean, look, we've shown, at least, look at the whole cannabis thing as I always use an example. Like, it's very clear that if we actually look past party lines, just stand together as states, as individuals, as whatever you want to call it, we can clearly make a difference in contrast to what they want to happen. In this case, the most important thing we can do, I think, to start all of this, other than sharing information, which, don't listen to people out there coming into chats and saying, you guys are all just doing nothing but talking. We need to get out there in the street, which I agree, action needs to be taken, but this can never stop. This is the most important part of this, which needs to then build out. Not that this needs to stop and we all march to the streets and start committing violence and get immediately arrested and shut down. It's like, it has to be smart. And this is the point. But yeah, I ultimately think that this is going to be stopped if we're able to, at the very least, show some peaceful resistance. I never advocate violence. Violence begets violence. However, there are times when it is necessary, even from a libertarian perspective, when you're being attacked, when your family's being threatened, whatever, that kind of, you find yourself in a position where you're under threat. Well, yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't be able to fight back, but to go out and create violence in the objective to change things, it doesn't make any sense to me. But maybe I'm wrong. I'm willing to accept that. But what we need to do is show resistance. If every single person in this country, which, I mean, right now, we're already seeing 60% of healthcare workers saying no to this vaccine. And if we just continue to dig our feet in and say no, they will have to show they're already showing their hand. So whatever this is, it was rammed through way too fast. My opinion, they felt they needed to drive this through because of some kind of endpoint that was coming. I don't know what that is, but it was clumsy. It was loud. It was fast. And they don't normally do it this way. So now if we push back and we dig our heels in, they will have to show even more. They'll have to come out with their aggressive mandates and their, mandatory vaccine programs and their forceful vaccine passport scenarios. And it will show what they really are even more so. Now, the hope is ultimately that as a collective of Americans, we can recognize that we have a right to say, you guys aren't even representing us anymore, and strive for something new. I don't have all the answers, but the point is we can't allow that to go forward, and hopefully other people in the world will also recognize it's very clear this government is not even close to representing what these people want, and hopefully, I don't even know what the answer would be, but we need to show resistance, right? That's the point. Is on the same note there to end on that comment is nobody has all the answers. Everyone out there pretending like they know exactly what we will do. We don't need to be able to have the solution to be able to point out that there's a problem, right? And that is that's another fallacy in there, right? I'm not claiming I have every answer about how to build the new society. We've never done it before, right? Cut me some slack, guys. We're trying to do something we've never done before. But the point is, we have to see that they're wrong, that they're lying, and that we can't allow it. Dig your heels in, people.
That is the truth right there. Well, that's Ryan, everybody. He's over at the Last American Vagabond. He has his shows are up just about every day, I would say. And if you have questions, comments, you can follow his work. Support his work too. Support all of our work. Share this information. Share this show. We're going to get no love from the algorithms. They hate people like us that are talking about inconvenient things. Ryan, you're the best. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, sir. Anytime.